My body bled from more than childbirth. The metallic tang of it was on my lips, a stark contrast to the sterile, antiseptic smell of the delivery room. 10. I had just given birth to 10 babies, 10 tiny, perfect, fragile daughters. The effort had torn me apart, leaving me a hollowed-out wreck on the hospital bed, but my heart was soaring. 10 miracles, NBUT, before I could even hear all their cries in unison, before I could ask the nurses if they were all okay. His shadow fell over me. My husband, Cale, wasn't looking at the incubators lining the wall like a row of precious gems. He was looking at me, and his face was a mask of pure, undiluted fury. 10? He whispered, his voice dangerously low, a rumble that promised an earthquake. You gave me 10, and not a single one is a boy? And I tried to speak, to tell him they were healthy, that they were ours, that they were a blessing. But my throat was raw, and the words caught somewhere between my heart and my mouth. I could only manage a weak nod, my eyes pleading with him. NHE took a step closer, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. The nurses froze, their professional smiles dissolving into fear. They saw it too, the storm that was about to break. I told you what would happen, he hissed, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. I told you I needed a son, an heir. What am I supposed to do with 10 useless girls? And then it happened. His hand, the same one that had once held mine and promised to protect me, struck me across the face. The force of it snapped my head to the side. The sound, a sickening crack in the quiet room. Pain, sharp and blinding, exploded behind my eye. The taste of blood filled my mouth again, this time from a split lip. And I lay there, stunned and humiliated, the cries of my newborn daughter sounding distant and muffled. He hadn't just hit me, he had attacked me in the most vulnerable moment of my life, surrounded by the new lives I had risked everything to create. He had declared them, and me, worthless. And in that moment, as the first tear mixed with the blood on my cheek, a cold, hard resolve settled in my soul. He thought this was my end. He thought he had broken me. He was wrong. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his. And if you're watching this, I need you to know that this story is for every woman who has ever been made to feel small. Hit that subscribe button and share this video, because you are not alone, and our voices need to be heard. Now, let me tell you how I took back my life. Section 1, the Gilded Cage NMY marriage to Cale, began like a fairy tale. He was the wealthiest man in our city, his family name synonymous with power and old money. I was a librarian, a woman who found solace in the quiet rustle of pages in the worlds they contained. When he noticed me, it felt like a chapter from one of my own romance novels. He was charming, attentive, and showered me with gifts that I, in my naivete, mistook for love. NMY parents were overjoyed. He can give you everything, Alara, my mother had said, her eyes shining. A life of comfort, of security. I believed her. I believed in the grand house he bought for us, with its sprawling gardens and silent, watchful staff. I believed in the silk dresses and diamond necklaces. I saw them as tokens of his affection, not the bars of a gilded cage he was slowly building around me. NTHE, first sign of the bars, appeared after our first year of marriage. We were at a lavish dinner party with his business associates. The conversation turned to children, and Cale draped his arm around me, smiling. My Ilara will give me a son soon, he announced to the table, a strong heir to carry on the family name. The men around the table nodded in approval, their wives smiling politely. I felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't a hope, it was a demand. When I didn't get pregnant right away, his charm began to fray at the edges. The flowers stopped. The late-night talks were replaced by terse questions. Have you seen the doctor? Is there something wrong with you? The implication was always clear. The fault was mine, and I threw myself into fertility treatments, enduring painful injections and invasive procedures, all while pretending to the outside world that we were the perfect, happy couple. My body became a project, a vessel whose sole purpose was to produce the son he craved. The love I thought we had was conditional, and the condition was a male heir. When I finally became pregnant, Cale was ecstatic. He was tender again, attentive. He'd place his hand on my stomach and talk to the baby, always referring to it as my boy. I prayed he was right, not for me, but for the peace of our home. When the doctor told us it was a girl, the light in Cale's eyes dimmed. He didn't say anything cruel, not then. He simply became distant, as if I had failed an important test. And our first daughter, Lyra, was a beautiful, quiet baby. I adored her, but Cale treated her like a placeholder. The next one will be a boy, he'd say, not even looking at her. NTHE pressure intensified with each passing year. Another daughter, then another. With each birth, a piece of him turned colder. He stopped coming to the hospital. He stopped pretending to care. The girls were raised by nannies in a wing of the house I rarely saw him enter. He started making comments in front of others, thinly veiled insults about my inability to do the one thing he asked of me. My wife is very good at giving me beautiful but expensive daughters, he'd say with a tight, humorless smile. And I was isolated. My old friends had drifted away, intimidated by Cale's wealth and possessiveness. My family lived in another state, and Cale made it difficult for me to visit, always citing some important social event I couldn't possibly miss. The grand house became a lonely palace, its silence broken only by the laughter of the daughters their father ignored, and I felt like a ghost in my own life, my purpose reduced to a biological function I kept failing. I endured it for my girls, telling myself that his wealth at least gave them a comfortable life. I didn't realize I was teaching them the same lesson I had learned, that a woman's worth is determined by a man. NTHE final pregnancy was a shock. The doctors had told me that after my 9th daughter, my body was unlikely to carry another child. But when the test came back positive, Cale saw it as his last chance. This time, he didn't just want a son, he demanded it. He hired the best fertility specialists in the world, putting me on a grueling regimen of hormones and treatments. My body was no longer my own. It was his final, desperate project. When the ultrasound revealed not 1 but 10 heartbeats, the doctor was stunned. He called it a medical miracle. Cale, however, saw it as a certainty. 10 chances, he said, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. One of them has to be a boy. The universe owes me this. NTHE pregnancy was hell. I was bedridden for months, my body swelling to an unrecognizable size. I was in constant pain, weak, and exhausted. But through it all, I felt the 10 tiny lives inside me, their movements, a secret language only I could understand. I loved them already, all of them, fiercely and unconditionally. I didn't care if they were boys or girls. They were mine. NTHE, day of the delivery. The operating room was crowded with specialists. It was a high-risk procedure, and I knew I might not survive. As they put me under, my last conscious thought was a prayer. Please, let them be safe. Let all of them be safe. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was Cale's face, and in his eyes I saw not relief, not joy, but a terrifying, cold hatred. That's when he asked the question. That's when he struck me. And that's when the woman he thought he had married died, and a warrior was born in her place. Silent Promise NTHE days following the birth were a blur of pain, both physical and emotional. My body was a landscape of stitches and bruises, a testament to the battle it had just endured. The hospital staff treated me with a mixture of awe and pity. I was the woman who had birthed 10 babies, but I was also the woman whose husband had assaulted her in the aftermath. And Cale did not visit again. He sent his assistant with a message. I was not to return to the main house. I was to be moved, along with the girls, to a remote estate in the countryside, a property he rarely used. The message was clear. I was being exiled. He was hiding his shame, his failure, his 10 new daughters, and the wife who had borne them. NTHE nurses would bring my daughters to me, one by one, for the brief moments I was strong enough to hold them. Their names were a song I had composed in my head during the long months of bed rest. Alara, Lyra, Thalia, Seraphina, Calliope, Phoebe, Daphne, Iris, Chloe, and Athena. 10 names for 10 tiny goddesses. And as I held each one, feeling their feather-light weight against my chest, their downy hair brushing my chin, the promise I made to myself in that blood-soaked moment solidified into a plan. I would not be a victim. I would not let my daughters grow up thinking they were worthless. Cale had wealth, power, and influence. I had nothing but a broken body and a mother's love. It would have to be enough. NMY's first act of rebellion was small, almost invisible. Cale had assigned a team of nannies and staff to the country estate, all loyal to him. They were my guards, my watchers. I knew they reported my every move, so I played the part he had cast for me. I was the broken, docile wife. I was quiet, compliant, and never spoke of what happened in the hospital. I let them think I was defeated. NBUT in the dead of night, when the house was still and the nannies were asleep, I began my education. I had been a librarian, and my greatest strength was my ability to acquire and process information. Cale had cut me off from the world, but he had forgotten one thing. The estate had an old, forgotten library filled with books on law, finance, and business. Night after night, I would slip out of my room, my body aching with every step, and make my way to that dusty sanctuary. I read until my eyes burned. I studied contract law, memorized financial loopholes, and learned how to trace assets. I read about corporate structures and offshore accounts. Cale's empire was built on complex legal and financial frameworks, and I was going to learn how to dismantle it, brick by brick. NMY daughters were my motivation. I would watch them sleep in their cribs, their 10 chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm, and I would feel a surge of strength that defied my physical pain. I was not just fighting for myself, I was fighting for their future. I was fighting for the right for them to exist, loved and valued, in a world that their own father had told them had no place for them. And I started to subtly cultivate an ally. One of the younger nannies, a girl named Anya, had a kindness in her eyes that the others lacked. She looked at my daughters with genuine affection, not as a job. I started talking to her, not about my plans, but about her life, her dreams. I learned she was sending money back to her own family, that she understood what it was like to be powerless. And one evening, as I was holding little Athena, I looked at Anya and spoke in a low voice. "He thinks they are worthless because they are not boys." Nanya's eyes filled with a sad understanding. "In the village I come from," she whispered, "they say a daughter is a treasure you must hide, lest a dragon try to steal it." "My husband is the dragon," I replied, and in that moment, I knew I could trust her. Nanya became my eyes and ears. She would bring me snippets of information from the main house, news of Cale's business dealings, whispers from the staff. She helped me get a burner phone, a lifeline to the outside world he thought he had severed. NFOR 2 years. I lived a double life. By day, I was the meek, convalescing wife, recovering from a difficult birth. By night, I was a general, planning a war, gathering intelligence, and preparing my weapons. The pain in my body slowly subsided, but the fire in my soul only grew hotter. Cale had made the mistake of giving me 2 things, time and a reason to fight. He would soon learn how costly that mistake would be. Section 3. Forging the weapons in BY, the time my daughters were toddlers, their personalities blossoming like unique flowers in a secret garden, my plan had moved into its next phase. Knowledge was my sword, but I needed a shield. I needed legal power. Using the burner phone Anya had procured for me, I made my first call. It was to a name I had found in my late-night research, a formidable all-female law firm in the city known for taking on powerful men and winning. They were discreet, relentless, and expensive, and I had no money of my own. Cale controlled every account. But I had something more valuable: information. I had spent 2 years mapping out his financial empire. I knew where the shell corporations were. I knew about the undeclared assets hidden in foreign banks. I knew about the illegal business practices he thought were perfectly concealed. And I spoke to the firm's lead partner, a woman named Ms. Sterling. Her voice was calm and sharp, like ice. I told her my story. I told her about the 10 daughters, the assault in the hospital, the exile. I told her I had no money to pay her. There was a pause on the line. Mr. Cale is a very powerful man, Mrs. Cale. To go against him, you need more than a story. You need proof. I have it, I said, my voice steady. I have account numbers, transaction records, names, dates. I have the blueprints to his entire kingdom. I will give you a percentage of the settlement, a large one. All I want is freedom for myself and a secure future for my daughters. And I want him to lose everything. There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint sound of her tapping a pen. Send me a sample of what you have, she finally said. Use an encrypted service. If it's what you claim it is, we'll talk. Getting that information out was a risk. The estate had security, and all internet traffic was monitored. But Anya, my silent ally, helped me. She smuggled a small USB drive loaded with the most damning evidence out of the estate on her day off. A week later, Miss Sterling called back. Her tone had changed. It was no longer just professional, it was predatory. The information is solid, she said. We're in. NFOR. The next year, we worked in secret. Miss Sterling and her team began building a case that was an intricate masterpiece of legal strategy. It was a multi-pronged attack. We would file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and abuse. We would sue for full custody of the children, and, most importantly, we would launch a financial assault that would expose every dirty secret Cale had. While the lawyers worked, my job was to continue playing my part and to prepare my daughters. They were still young, but they were incredibly bright. I began to teach them, not just their letters and numbers, but about strength, resilience, and self-worth. I told them stories, not of princesses waiting for a prince, but of queens who built their own empires, of women warriors who fought for their people. And I taught them to be observant, to be a team. They became my little spies, their innocent eyes seeing things the adult staff overlooked. They would report back to me in our secret game time. Daddy's angry man was here today, one might say, referring to Cale's lawyer. He left a big book in the study. NTHE evidence we gathered was overwhelming. We had proof of his abuse, documented by a doctor Anya had secretly brought to the estate under the guise of a visiting cousin. We had a mountain of financial documents proving fraud and tax evasion. And we had something else, something I had discovered by accident. And Cale had been systematically hiding assets in preparation for a divorce for years, long before I gave birth to the 10 girls. He had been planning to leave me with nothing all along. His obsession with a son wasn't just about legacy. It was about having a male heir to whom he could legally transfer his wealth, leaving me and any daughters I might have with the bare minimum. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just been disappointed, he had been plotting against me from the very beginning. NTHE Day. Miss Sterling told me we were ready. A strange calm washed over me. The fear I had lived with for so long was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. The storm was about to break, but this time I was the one holding the lightning. The first strike in THE Day we served Cale the papers was a day I will never forget. It was the day of his annual charity gala, the pinnacle of his social calendar, where he played the role of the benevolent billionaire. He was on stage, under the bright lights, giving a speech about family values and legacy. Then a process server, a nondescript man in a simple suit, walked calmly through the crowd of tuxedos and ball gowns. He walked right up to the stage and handed the thick stack of legal documents to Cale, right in the middle of his speech. "You've been served, Mr. Cale," the man said, his voice just loud enough for the microphone to pick up, and a collective gasp went through the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Cale's face, broadcast on the huge screens on either side of the stage, went from shock to white-hot rage. He stared at the papers in his hand, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in front of the city's elite. The humiliation was public, profound, and perfectly executed. It was the first taste of the powerlessness he had inflicted on me for years. NTHE fallout was immediate. The news spread like wildfire. Billionaire Cale served divorce papers mid-speech. Wife alleges abuse and fraud. The headlines were brutal. His phone began ringing off the hook. His business partners, his friends, the members of his exclusive clubs, they all wanted to know what was happening. NHE tried to control the narrative, of course. His PR team released a statement calling my allegations the desperate lies of a scorned and unstable woman. He tried to paint me as mentally fragile, broken by the trauma of such a large birth, manipulated by greedy lawyers. MBUT, he had underestimated me. And he had underestimated Ms. Sterling. We didn't just leak allegations. We leaked proof. An anonymous source, one of Ms. Sterling's brilliant paralegals, began feeding documents to a hungry press. A redacted bank statement showing a hidden offshore account. A copy of a property deed in a mistress's name. A sworn affidavit from a former employee detailing Cale's verbal abuse. Each day brought a new revelation, a new crack in his public facade. The man who prided himself on control was losing it spectacularly. He was used to fighting battles in boardrooms, where he could bully and intimidate people into submission. He had no idea how to fight a war on this front, where public opinion was the battlefield and truth was the ultimate weapon. Back at the country estate, the atmosphere had changed. The staff, who had once been Cale's loyal watchers, were now uncertain. Their loyalty was to power, and for the first time, it seemed that power was shifting. They started looking at me differently, with a newfound respect and a little bit of fear, and Cale tried to retaliate. He cut off all funds to the estate, hoping to starve us out. He thought without his money, the staff would leave, the power would be shut off, and I would come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. NHE was wrong again. Miss Sterling had anticipated this. She had already filed an emergency motion in court, and the judge, seeing the evidence of Cale's financial control and abuse, immediately ordered him to continue paying all household expenses and a generous temporary alimony. The check he was forced to write, the first of many, was a victory that tasted sweeter than any revenge. NMY daughters were too young to understand the legal complexities, but they understood the shift in the air. They felt the fear that had been a constant, low hum in our lives begin to dissipate. They saw their mother, who had been quiet and sad for so long, begin to stand taller, her voice stronger. One evening, my daughter Lyra, who was the most observant of them all, came to me as I was reading over some legal documents. She put her small hand on my arm. "Are you fighting the dragon, Mama?" she asked, her voice a whisper. I looked down at her serious little face, and I smiled a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "Yes, my love," I said, "Mama is fighting the dragon. And we are going to win the battle for the children." And Cale's most vicious attack came, as I knew it would, in the custody battle. His lawyers painted me as an unfit mother. They used my past as a weapon against me. I was a simple librarian who had married him for his money. I was emotionally unstable, suffering from postpartum depression on a scale never before seen. They argued that a woman who had birthed 10 children at once could not possibly be mentally competent to raise them. They claimed I was a danger to my own daughters, that my erratic behavior and delusional allegations were creating a toxic environment. Cale, they argued, with his vast resources and team of professional nannies, was the only one who could provide a stable home for the girls. He, the man who had called them useless and refused to even see them for years, was now positioning himself as their only savior. It was a brutal, soul-crushing process. I had to sit in a courtroom and listen to lawyers twist my life into a grotesque caricature. They brought in paid experts who testified about my supposed mental instability without ever having met me. They tried to use my quiet, reserved nature as proof that I was cold and unloving. NBUT Sterling was prepared. For every lie they told, she presented a truth. They said I was unstable. We presented the testimony of the doctor Anya had smuggled in, who detailed not my instability, but the physical and emotional abuse I had endured. She testified that my quietness was not coldness, but a symptom of living in constant fear, They said Cale could provide a better home. We presented the testimony of Anya, who bravely took the stand and described the years of neglect. She told the court how Cale had never once visited the girls, never asked about them, never even sent a birthday card. She described the exile to the country estate, painting a clear picture of a man trying to hide his children, not raise them. NTHE turning point came when Cale himself had to take the stand. Ms. Sterling cross-examined him with surgical precision. She was calm, polite, but her questions were like daggers. "Mr. Cale, you claim to want what's best for your daughters. Can you name them for the court?" And Cale froze. He shifted in his seat, a deer in the headlights. He looked at his lawyer, who could do nothing. He stammered. He could name 1, maybe 2. But 10? He couldn't. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. N. "You can't name your own children, can you, Mr. Cale?" Miss Sterling pressed, her voice still quiet. "Nye. They have nannies for that," he finally mumbled, a pathetic excuse that sealed his fate. And then she moved in for the kill. "Mr. Cale, isn't it true that on the day of their birth, after your wife had undergone a life-threatening procedure to deliver your 10 children, you struck her in the face?" NHE denied it, of course. He blustered and lied, calling the accusation absurd. "Then perhaps you can explain this," Ms. Sterling said, and a large photo appeared on the courtroom screens. It was a picture a nurse had secretly taken on her phone that day in the hospital. It was a close-up of my face, my cheeks swollen and bruised, a trickle of blood from my lip. It was undeniable. NTHE courtroom erupted. Cale's face went ashen. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his power, that he never imagined a simple nurse would have the courage to document his crime. NTHE judge, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, looked at the photo, then at Cale, with undisguised contempt. The custody battle was over. I was granted full custody of my 10 daughters. Cale was given no visitation rights, deemed a potential danger to the children he had never wanted. And I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could breathe for the first time in a decade. I hadn't just won a legal battle. I had won my children's freedom. I had proven that a mother's love was more powerful than a billionaire's influence. The dragon had been wounded, badly. Now it was time to deliver the final blow. NTHE kingdom crumbles. NTHE custody loss was a personal humiliation for Cale, but the financial trial was his public execution. All the evidence we had gathered, all the secrets I had uncovered in that dusty library, were laid bare for the world to see. NMs. Sterling and her team systematically dismantled his empire in court. They presented the intricate web of shell corporations he had used to hide money. They showed the tax authorities how he had evaded millions in taxes. They exposed the fraudulent deals that had built his fortune. NHI's business partners, once his staunchest allies, abandoned him. They were terrified of being implicated in his crimes. The government launched multiple investigations into his company. His assets were frozen. The stocks of his flagship company plummeted until they were worthless. The Cale empire, once a towering monument to wealth and power, was crumbling into dust. NHE was forced to sell everything to pay his legal fees and the massive settlement the court awarded me. The main house, the cars, the private jet, the art collection, all of it was liquidated. The man who had once owned the city was now facing bankruptcy and potential prison time. NTHE settlement was staggering. It wasn't just a divorce settlement, it was restitution. It was the return of the wealth he had tried to hide from me and my children. I was no longer the poor librarian. I was one of the wealthiest women in the country. But the money was never the point. The money was just a tool. It was the means to an end. NTHE end was freedom. The end was security. The end was ensuring that my 10 daughters would never have to depend on the whims of a cruel man for their survival. They would have every opportunity, every advantage, not because of their father, but in spite of him. And I used the money to create a new life for us, far away from the city and the ghosts of our past. I bought a large, beautiful home, but not a palace. It was a home filled with light, laughter, and books. We had gardens where the girls could play, and a library that was the heart of the house. And I also established a foundation in their 10 names, a foundation dedicated to helping women and children escape abusive situations. It provided legal aid, shelter, and educational grants. I used the dragon's own treasure to help the very people he would have preyed upon. It was the ultimate justice. And I never saw Cale again. The last I heard, he was living in a small, rented apartment, a broken man haunted by the ghosts of his own making. He had lost everything because he couldn't see the value in what he had been given. He had searched for a single heir and had been blind to the 10 treasures standing right in front of him.